Hello and welcome to Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast with your host, Buddy Sotelo Esquire, wrestling's premier photographer, Mike Lano, and we have back with us after a little bit of a hiatus, wrestling attorney from Canada, Exquisite, and that is Jonathan Schwartz. So thank you so much for coming and joining us again this week, Jonathan. And
glad to be back.
Yeah, and Mike, we're gonna. This will be your last show for a little while, and we'll have you back as a guest star. But you know, the recording time.
I can do when we tape at like 3, 4, 5 at the latest Pacific time. I can make those shows. Just can't do the 7s.
Yeah, 7 o'clock.
That's what you'd offered. That's what you'd offered Evan and myself to keep us going. But let me ask you about this card that you went to. Was it it was the guest that we had on a couple of months ago? The couple, and I don't know if you've been to their shows before, but tell us about the card.
This is the very first live wrestling show that I have been to since I clocked it back. I last time I was at a live wrestling show was in 2018. So this is the first live show that I've been to in about 5 years. And so it was the Totally Queer Wrestling Federation.
And where was the show? Where was the venue?
Armistice Brewery in Richmond.
Richmond. Okay, that's for people who don't know. It's just a little bit. What would you say? North of Oakland?
Yeah, it's actually west of Oakland. Even though everyone thinks Oakland is as far west as you can go. Go a little bit further west, and Richmond is right there. It's right where the San Rafael bridge is between Marin.
And that bridge takes you over to Marin. So Oakland is actually way inland. It's not. I mean, it has parts of water near.
So the water, but it goes diagonally. So
it's weird.
You go a little bit more west, and that's where you have Richmond. It's right on the. Richmond used to be a really underdeveloped area, and as Marin County has and San Francisco have upscaled itself, they've sort of brought a lot of Richmond with it. You know, a lot of expatriates from the Marin County area have moved over to Richmond because they can afford to live there.
Well, no, Richmond actually has a good music scene. I took photos of Bjork had a concert there, as did the Godfathers of Electronica, Kraftwerk from Germany had a big show there. So
now in the music Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
And Richmond was a venue for Roy Shire. It was a regular. It was probably every other week, sort of like Modesto Stockton. Wasn't weekly because the Cow Palace even was every 3 to 4 weeks on Saturdays. But the smaller venues for Roy Shire, Richmond was one of them, a perennial one for years and years.
So it looks like it. So there's a small brewery that had outdoor. They put a ring outdoors, and it featured a lot of folks that you are familiar with. Folks like Christina Von Eerie was on the show, and Kikyo Fallen Flower was on the show, and our pal Shane Dynasty or Doc Atrocity was on the show. He still gets in there and wrestles. I'm not sure why he does, and every so often the Stoner Brothers will be on the show. They weren't on this particular show. And then Ryan Devine, who we had on, and Ellie Devine, were a married couple. He was declared the official commissioner of Totally Queer Wrestling. And she just worked the show doing, handout stuff and working with the crowd. Ellie she wasn't booked on the show. On this particular show. And then for the halftime, right before intermission, which is as long as I could stay, they had Austin Starr versus Antonio Voorhees.
Well, those are big names.
Yeah, and those guys fought over the Lone Star Championship belt. And it was a good match.
Lone Star Championship belt, so a Texas belt on a California
a Texas belt on a California card. What do you think? You know, it was kind of a weird defense, but it was a really good match. I mean, it was the kind of match that, would be on maybe the low end of an AEW or WWE card, maybe a dark match. So it was good. It was, it was some quality stuff. fans were into it. Maybe about a crowd of about 200 to 300 showed up on a Sunday afternoon, which is kind of surprising. And I can say a good time was had by all. It's not, even though they call it totally queer wrestling, there weren't a lot of gay jokes. There weren't a lot of things that were over the top or overly sexualized or anything that I would consider, any different than like 90% of the indie shows I've been to otherwise. And it was just good to hear the slam of the mat again. There's something about that.
Wait. Let me ask you though. So it seems like it's what I liked about them when you and I interviewed them was it's an all-inclusive. It's not just, for people, it's not just gay or queer or trans wrestlers. It's pretty much like everybody on an equal plane. Everybody can perform.
They had like this guy who's a cross-dresser as Rosie, like a Rosie the Riveter gimmick, but it was a guy, in drag. And he fought Christina Von Eerie. And that's about as much of a, women fighting men, that kind of cross thing is about as far as it really went. It wasn't, again, over the top, crazy, hypersexualized stuff. In fact, watching guys, doing the dick flip and the and having simulated sex with blow up dolls is I've seen it in indie shows, which I think are more.
Well, what's his face who's kind of X'd out of wrestling? Jonathan?
Joey Ryan.
Yeah, Joey Ryan
the guy
was
with
doing that.
The U-Pornplex, it was called.
Yeah.
What was it called? The U-Porterplex.
No, U-Porn. After a website that I've personally never ever visited because I'm happily married. He actually wound up getting it sponsored by them before he got pretty much canceled outright by wrestling, and if the allegations are against him are true, rightly so.
Yes, well, that's for. I think.
But wait. So now Christina Von Eerie, who was a GCW Women's World Champ for Jeff Jarrett when he had that kind of, I don't know, I guess it was like a lot of guys that he took with him from TNA, not all of them, but Sanjay Dutt went with him and some other folks. I think even Nick Aldis left
Global
with him.
Force Wrestling was that pet project.
GFC. But Christina Von Eerie was a product of the Bay Area. I thought, Russ, where did she train up in Sacramento? Because
I've worked cards with her. Actually, I managed a match directly against her. She was my opponent with a wrestler that I had named Leopardo Loco, who was in the persona of a cat, and she wound up pinning my man by using a cat toy to mesmerize him and made him spin around a bunch of times, and then she knocked him over with a sunset flip and won the match. So Christina
still had 8 more matches after that.
I'm sorry. Oh yeah, exactly. He had to get 8 more matches. He
lost one of his 9. Like she had a terrific match with Candice LeRae down in Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, Los Angeles. I shot. It was a terrific match in 2012, and Candice was already well established. Christina, always very good. So is she back living in the Bay Area? Do you know?
No, she flew down. There were some flyouts from.
So where is she
in the area?
I forget because I thought she was like living in Canada someplace. Out of all places.
Michigan, I think. She was in
Michigan.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to talk to her for very long. And also, Kikyo, the Fallen Flower, came down from Washington. She lives in Washington now, and she was a good Bay Area. And Brittany Wonder was there, too.
I'm familiar with her.
Again, someone I worked with in wrestling for charity. So it looks like a lot of the folks that, are regulars here in the Bay Area, no pun intended, are showing up at this totally queer wrestling and, giving it balance. So it's not just all, everyone that's just a transvestite or cross-dresser. It's really.
You really don't. I mean, I interviewed Pollo Del Mar, which the name Jonathan and Russ, if you basically when she, and that's the pronoun that she prefers to have, but just strictly transvestite wrestler who is giant. When I was interviewing her and talking to her at the WrestleCon, I mean, she's taller than me, and I'm 6'3", but she had heels on. But she's like the forerunner, and she last night for Billy Corgan's NWA managed in the main event for night one of the Crockett Cup in wherever they are in North Carolina, the 2-night. In fact, they're on today. Terrific card, like 20 teams. So it's like the Crockett Cup of old, which was really classic stuff when you consider the teams. And Ricky Morton teamed up with his son, for example. But Pollo is kind of a trendsetter, pioneer, because there's not a whole lot of that. So let me ask you guys, since
there's not a whole lot of that here. In Mexico, performers in drag have been a fixture for decades.
Exoticos,
yes.
Oh, for decades and decades. Yeah. Well before Pimpinella. Yeah, well before Pimpinella Escarlata, who's sort of the godmother of that. And they're accepted, whether they're rudo or a technico, heel or face, they're just accepted, one of the boys. So it's far more, what I was getting at was it's far more progressive in Mexico. And we're talking at least 4 or 5 decades, on the way up to Maximo, who is the son of Super Porky, who passed away, one of the Brazos brothers, Brazo de Oro, I think it was. But in this country, we still have I can't really think of too many, and I'm not referring to Adrian Street or Adrian Adonis, who are straight guys, but pretending to be gay and dressing up that way. Pollo is, recently, we have Effie, we have more openly out, proud to say they're gay or transvestite or trans. I think we have very few. We've got Giselle Shaw. We have, of course, thankfully she was back on AEW Dynamite the other night.
Nyla Rose.
Yeah, Nyla Rose. But so Jonathan, maybe you can tell us. The U.S., in my opinion, is still way light years behind where it should be, or way light years behind Mexico. What is your thought on both that? Are we making baby steps, and how is Canada? Canada probably more progressive in that respect than the U.S., I'm guessing.
Well, I think our attitudes towards gender identity and difference and that sort of thing are a little bit more progressive than they are in the U.S. I think that kind of goes across the board for most social issues, though, here versus there. That said, I think that there are certainly parts in the U.S. that are more liberal than we are, and vice versa, that there's going to be parts of Canada where, you wouldn't necessarily want to give full expression to yourself and feel safe walking down the street.
Which parts of Canada would that be?
I'm not burying anyone. What else?
Not outie.
What I will say is a lot of the social issues that kind of pop up in the U.S. do have a tendency to make their way up here, even if it kind of runs counter to what I'd consider a generally pretty accepting culture. So, for example, I know in the United States, there's been a big furor about, about people who are transgender or using public facilities, or about drag queen performances, and somehow all of a sudden that's supposed to be damaging to children.
Rainbows on beer cans.
Some like it hot, notwithstanding, and that was something like 60 years ago. But we have some of the same issues cropping up here. I don't know if it's a thing in the United States as broadly as it is here, but for example, in the Toronto Public Library system, and I live in Toronto, for many, many years, it's called a drag story hour. And you'll have drag queens basically come to a public library and read a storybook to a bunch of kids in full costume. And the kids love it. And, the adults are all happy about how inclusive it is and the positive message that it sends, and the fact that the kids don't really care it's somebody dressed up in a princess costume. They don't really care what's under the costume. But there are some pretty staunchly conservative elements up here who've decided to make that a problem.
Yeah, we have.
So there's a bit of that everywhere.
Oh, it's worse. I think it's almost a virus coming up from the United States, infiltrating Canada with the ridiculousness. We don't need to get into that, but that's my opinion only here. Fine with saying that our country, the U.S., is going backwards in very, very quickly, and it's scary. You could even talk about the books being removed from the library, or there was just one unhappy mother who, I think the author, young lady, she's brilliant. She spoke. She's like the poet laureate of the U.S. now. African American young lady. She's like under 20. Amanda Gorman, something like that.
She spoke very eloquently at Obama's inauguration, at one of them, I think.
Or Biden's inauguration, whatever year that was, and has at least one best-selling book. So one mother who admitted not reading it complained because of what that governor in Florida, DeSantis, has put out there. The book was removed. She just said, "Oh, it has hate speech." It has no hate speech. It's
in fairness, you guys banned To Kill a Mockingbird.
It's insane. It's insane. It's
and 1984 as well.
You know, 1984.
Which is ironic.
Well, no, this country is getting to be 1984 with, and I'll just sum it up: no abortions in tons of states, so women have no right over their bodies. All of this crap about, and then making up stuff about other schools where the school said we don't have a transvestite story time, and who would care? I mean, the kids, thank God, they've got somebody coming there interested enough to read to them, and all of this stuff. I mean, it is bad. So, baby steps. Can you think? Are there more than the two? And Giselle Shaw's from Canada, I believe.
Yes.
So really, Nyla Rose is it for American-born. We have Sonny Kiss, and you notice these are all guys that are people, athletes that are in AEW, and Giselle Shaw's in Impact, which, by the way, Impact had an outstanding show last week, and I'm still raving about Rampage. So I'm kind of moving a little bit. Rampage was almost the perfect show. There was 3 titles from 3 different companies, 4 outstanding matches. When you have Zack Sabre Jr. and the quality wrestlers, who was the Japanese wrestler that had brain cancer and similar to Liger, or not brain cancer, but he had a serious injury, water on the brain, that came out. Is it Shibata?
I thought it was Shibata.
Yeah, Shibata, who has perhaps the most unique entrance music. It's just guitar strumming, it's beautiful guitar strumming. It was an insanely great show, and a lot of people miss Rampage. They miss it the week before because we heard it was going to be, it was bumped to Saturday, a week ago Saturday. Supposed to come after the NBA game. It was listed, and then it wasn't listed anymore in the on-screen log. So, but that's a worthy show to go back, and if you have cable or you have satellite, try to VOD it, because most everybody missed it. It was not, that's the thing that hurts. So I'm now moving into the Saturday Fusion 2-hour AEW show. If they get bumped around the time slot, Saturday is difficult enough. It's date night. It's when, kids want to do things. You cannot have 3 hours of wrestling, 2 to 3 hours minimum every single night of the week. We got to have a break. So I'm going to ask you guys, do you think we're going to see some casualties, like, or are people just not watching? Are they dealing with this fact that we have 2 to 3 hours a week? Like, for example, now, Tuesdays, 2 hours NXT, and then Dark Side. And when MLW comes back, that would be 4 hours theoretically. Or actually, it's an old show, so it's 5 hours, 2 hours of MLW. So that would, if and when they return to reels, that would be 5 hours on a Tuesday. You look, Thursday is Impact, 2 hours, 1 hour New Japan. Friday, 2 hours SmackDown, 1 hour Rampage.
So I'm going to jump in on this because this actually is the subject of the column that I wrote this past Friday and the one that's coming out in 2 weeks. In terms of there being a consolidation, of there being too much wrestling on TV, I'll leave that for other people. I think the more product out there, the better. I think that it's going to be to certainly fragment the audience, but I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing between all the different outlets. I mean, you've got to remember the days when you could have Gunsmoke or All in the Family, or the Golden Girls poll tens of millions of people to a station are long past. Back in 2021, they actually did Nielsen, did a study and found that the four major networks combined only drew 8 million viewers on a Saturday night. So we're looking at a bit of a different world. The other thing that I kind of see for Collision, which is the new AEW Saturday show, is it's basically got an 8 p.m. start time on Saturday night. I agree with you that the demographic that's going to watch, hopefully, is not the 18 to 35-year-old males, because otherwise I'd be concerned that we're kind of turning into incels if you're going to be watching wrestling that on a Saturday night and you're 18 to 35 and male. What I will say is that for an 8 p.m. start time, AEW has an opportunity to chase a different demographic, and one that basically leads in and leads out of that 1835. Who's watching TV at 8 o'clock on Saturday night? You've got I think they have a chance to capture kids, and they have a chance.
Well, they're just going to DVR it and watch it in their own time.
Well, yeah, that's the whole thing.
Is that, tougher to manage.
When wrestling is on, is becoming less material. When something is actually on, and live, unless it's the NBA finals or something like that, or a football game or something like that.
My Celtics are out. I don't care about the NBA anymore.
Yeah, well, your Celtics have bigger problems than just being done for this season. But well, that's subject of yet another show. But kids especially are just used to watching stuff on demand, and it's just whenever they feel like watching it, there it is. And they don't. But
are they watching? We don't even know. Well, I know they know how to measure that. Some stations and premium stations don't always release that info. I know Netflix and Amazon Prime don't really release those numbers the way traditional cable and networks do. But then it's fragmented. Then people are watching just clips they see online. They may not necessarily be watching full shows. I just don't know why it wasn't put in the classic 6:05 Eastern that NWA, and then when it turned into WCW when they had the Saturday show, but particularly Georgia Championship Wrestling dating back to when the Superstation took off around 77, on all the way through until, that was the end and Turner got rid of World Championship Wrestling. That 6:05 on Saturdays at least had decent ratings, and it was early enough that you could then go out on a date if you were a kid, or go out with your gang or your buds and, go do something, so you got your wrestling out of the way, and it was a 2-hour show. I don't know, Jonathan, what do you think about the 6:05? That's what I suggested to those folks, but they didn't listen to me.
I think the 6:05 worked at the time, but I think that for a slightly older but still not old enough to be heading out on the Saturday night faction, I think that you still have a chance to get pretty good bang for the buck, and you also have a chance to kind of redefine the program in a bid to kind of get the next 18 to 35 cohort. I think one of the challenges that we've seen generally with wrestling, going back to the wave that came with Hulk Hogan, and then through the Attitude Era, I've always kind of had this hypothesis that it was the same group of kids who went from Hulk Hogan, get to the point where they're late in high school, early university, and when you're that age, you like something a little bit silly to watch, and they fell back into wrestling. And they've been trying to chase that 18 to 35 cohort ever since, but the problem is 18 to 35 only works until your younger brother, who's 16 or 14 or 12 and nowhere near as cool as you are, tries to get it in, and then the momentum kind of drops dead. What AEW has a chance with this show to do is to catch the younger fans and the older fans who are disaffected by the current product, who don't necessarily want to watch Jon Moxley bleed all over some preliminary guy, and kind of build that next generation of fans up. That's kind of what I see as the opportunity coming here.
Well, it's almost a discussion of brand split, and that CM Punk will anchor that. Yeah. No, we all hope
WWE's been doing it for 20 years, so A, it's derivative, and B, WWE in the time that they've been doing it have never figured out how to do it properly.
And that's what we need is another set of titles. That's what we as wrestling fans.
How about they figure out what to do with the whole second federation they have? Give Ring of Honor a slot. Or if you really wanted to make it distinct, and this is a point that I'm going to make in my next column, you've got a ton of guys who are kind of hovering around the mid-card who are smaller wrestlers and incredibly athletic and very charismatic. You've got the Hooks, you've got Danhausen, you've got Orange Cassidy, you've got Commander, you've got
tons of guys. Bandito,
the Lucha Brothers,
it's a heavyweight, yeah.
Any number of wrestlers who, Daivari and Tony Nese, who were in the cruiserweight division in WWE. You've got any number of singles titles that are currently occupying a similar space. You've got a whole Action Andretti would be another one. You've got all of these younger, more athletic, great technical wrestlers who aren't necessarily strong promos, but have decent characters otherwise. Give them something to fight for and make it exclusive to this time slot. You've got half a roster that are basically positioned as superheroes. Pitch them to kids who still believe in superheroes.
The other thing too is
like Tiger Mask when I was a kid, or the Blue Blazer.
And there were four total. The fourth Tiger Mask is still out there in New Japan, but they've been advertising and the discussion going back and forth with the internet wrestling community, IWC, is all of these folks that, like Tony collects them and they'll be hot for a while and then you won't see them for 6, 7, 8 months and they're not even injured. So, but they're advertising, at least the advertising going out, Samoa Joe, Rusev, forget his new character's name already, Miro, and some of the other folks, Thunder Rosa, who apparently, hopefully is going to be cleared. She'll start competing, but she, in the meantime, has been doing Hispanic commentary on the weekly TV and pay-per-views, which is great to keep her hand in it. And some of those wrestlers that are just on the shelf that you just don't see. Scorpio Sky, we haven't seen him. He was hot, and then no reason, unexplained. I almost think Tony, and then you have this whole promotion, this Ring of Honor, with dismal ratings. Honestly, people aren't watching it because there's just too much stuff, or they're not aware of Honor Club, that you have to pay to see. It's very reasonable. I don't know, Jonathan, if you are doing that or can even squeeze in Ring of Honor. A lot of folks can't. And we haven't even talked about all the streaming stuff. So free TV, I'm only talking about free TV, every night, 3 to 4 hours, really. I guess only Wednesday with the 2 hours of Dynamite, they don't have anybody else promoting. Although that's when NWA drops, I think, is typically on Wednesday. You have to go to their YouTube channel, but it is free. But
that was one thing that I really liked about the NWA when they brought it back on the internet, was that it was a 1 hour show. And to me, I kind of miss the 1 hour format show. I thought that makes for a tighter type of broadcast where your interviews can't go on for 20 minutes. You can't have a 20-minute entry, ring entry and guys, wandering around the ring, or have, the long distance walk as they slowly.
Well, that's the beauty of Rampage, is they're right in the ring. Right when they come back from commercial, right at the start of the broadcast, more or less, no intros. No intros, but no entrances.
But I think the constraint of a 1 hour show actually works to wrestling's benefit, as opposed to, having the freedom to just go longer, unless it's a special show like a WrestleMania, or a SummerSlam or Saturday night's main event. I like the fact that for a long time, wrestling was an hour, and you really, yes, they usually had a bunch of squash matches, but they deliver you one match per hour that was usually like a really fun one to watch, something that was a lot closer, that wasn't just to one guy that you knew was going to win and some faceless did. I don't know.
And I think that's kind of the challenge with AEW as it stands. I think the format that they've kind of hit on so far is that every week you're pretty much guaranteed 1 or 2 really good to excellent matches and 1 or 2 really solid promos. But that's 1 or 2 great matches and promos spread across a full 2 hours. I'm going to channel Evan for a second and just say that what I really want out of Collision and wrestling in general, but I get that they have to pay the bills, is put on a few really good, solid wrestling matches. And AEW has all the talent in the world to accomplish that, but they don't necessarily give them the platform in which to do it. So my hope for them, especially if they're kind of trying, as I humbly suggest, and I'm not on the payroll yet, as they try to kind of broaden the audience a bit to kind of capture that next round of 18 to 35s, is put the emphasis on the action in ring. And not the kind of gory action that we see sometimes there as well. I think that there's definitely room for that in wrestling, but I think that certainly the flagship shows seem to play into it every episode. And I gotta tell you, if I have a choice between my kids watching a bit of Raw or a bit of SmackDown or a Jon Moxley segment, the first segment on AEW, I know where my feet are going.
That's what I was saying, though, Jonathan, and both of you guys. Last Friday, though, the show opened with the Hijo de Vikingo against Dralistico. So total beautiful lucha match, and then the Shibata match, and then the
Willow Nightingale,
Zack Sabre Jr. So every match I thought was at least 4 stars and above. So that's what you're talking about. And every match was great. And there really was hardly a promo, anything to sully it up. It may not be everybody's cup of tea. It was certainly not really sports entertainment. It was pro wrestling at its finest, I think. And it was probably the best Rampage show I've seen. I don't miss anything other than the one a week ago, Saturday, where they jiggled it around. And that can't happen because when they do they have to bump the Rampages to Saturday. The ratings have been in the toilet. And I hate saying this, but AEW's ratings and their house show attendance have been down, particularly the house show stuff, but that's not really a factor. But when it's a TV promotion, that doesn't bode well for Fusion. So, a lot of us are a little jittery. We hope it works. But again, when the Rampage has been bumped to Saturday, the ratings certainly are nowhere close to where they are at their regular time slot, because it's too confusing for fans to try to keep up, or they forget. They don't DVR it in advance. But now this Fusion thing, every 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific, we'll have to see it. It starts now in 13 days from today, or a week from this coming Saturday.
I think that both TNT and Tony Khan understand what they're getting into with this. I don't think that there's any real expectation that this is going to pull any kind of hugely significant ratings, CM Punk or no CM Punk. I think that one of the things that I'm hopeful for with Collision is that it's a throwback to the idea of wrestling as inexpensive programming that a network can throw on the air and draw more eyeballs than the infomercial on the next channel over. I don't think that there's necessarily any greater expectation surrounding ratings for Collision than that. And I think that that's a good thing, because that also gives them license to innovate. I think that, notwithstanding what I just said about blood and gore, I think one of the better recent examples of Saturday Night Wrestling is actually ECW's Hardcore flagship TV show. And that was wildly innovative at the time. Yes, there was the hardcore element to it, but one of the things that Paul Heyman did really well with that show is he never delivered the same show week to week. So you could have a promo-heavy show one week, you could have a recap of angles the next week, you could have 2 or 3 matches the third week. Invariably some combination of Tajiri and Super Crazy and Little Guido would be on the show.
Well, that's what I was about to say.
And then, out of nowhere,
so much better.
He would pull off Eddie Guerrero and Dean Malenko for an hour.
Yeah, the booking was so much better with that ECW show. When you look back on that ECW show, you say to yourself, my God, this is really, really well booked from top to bottom. It's got a wonderful pacing to it. There are good matches. A lot of guys, we now see over time, the people who, became major stars, like Sabu and Sandman and Mikey Whipwreck and so forth,
But let's be fair.
Yeah.
And I'm as big a Heyman fan as the next guy. We focus on the real stars who came out of it, but I think that the two things that ECW you really kind of have to bear in mind are, one, Heyman's brilliance was in playing whatever hand he was dealt. So he was able to basically...
In terms of talent being rated, which occurred regularly, he had to keep redeveloping these guys and also emphasize their strengths, hide their weaknesses, which he did brilliantly.
And to be honest, he pulled guys who had, in some cases, solid or less than solid careers and turned them into something. Sandman was not a big name before ECW.
I saw him wrestle for Savoldi.
Yeah.
He and Tommy Fierro.
I saw him I remember him wrestling in a wetsuit. Tommy.
Exactly. Right.
Tommy Dreamer came out in suspenders and a bow tie and had a kayfabe brother GQ Madison at one point. So, there's that part. There's the part where Sabu had the homicidal, suicidal, genocidal character and couldn't cut a promo to save his life. So you make him...
He never spoke.
Yeah, and he still can't. And he recognized that, and he played to his strength. But for every success like that, in the early days of ECW, you would have, a Don Morocco and I know people love Don Morocco, and I am one of them, or a Jimmy Snuka, long past they were of use to WWE, kind of be the name to draw. And then you'd have guys like Tommy Cairo or Johnny Hotbody or Tony Stetson kind of come out to round out cards. There was a lot of...
Well, that's when Eddie Gilbert. That's when Eddie Gilbert was booking before his so-called best friend Paul Heyman pushed him out of the way and out of ECW. But Eddie had...
I think you had DC Drake, who was...
we had him
pre-ECW.
Yeah. No, he was in there early on, but he had Terry Funk and Kevin Sullivan regularly to pull from, and Eddie Gilbert was already a genius at booking from his Bill Watts days, but now here he could rely on Terry Funk and Kevin Sullivan to help him out until Heyman came in, and Eddie was soon gone, which was kind of heartbreaking for a lot of us who were friends with Eddie. But Heyman is great, and that's why the bloodline is sort of like a combo of Goodfellas, Godfather, and continues to be great every week. I don't know what, none of us can predict what's going to happen. And so I don't know now. Let's delve into that from last Friday, SmackDown. Are the Usos going to break away and now feud because they got attacked by Solo Sikoa at Roman's? He did the swerve. He was first going to stand with his brothers, and then he did the Terry Gordy spike. Who else did the spike? There was another wrestler besides
Umaga
Terry.
Recently.
Oh, yeah. Umaga picked it
but
up.
Also,
right.
Kamala did it for a while, and you also had was it Shibuya do it, or did you?
No, I don't recall Kamala doing it. Not Kenji Shibuya. No, it just, to my mind, is Terry Gordy, and then a little later Umaga, the late family member, and so now that's Sikoa is paying tribute to him. But so, Jonathan, where do you see it potentially going now? Are they going to eventually have those two feud, the Usos against Roman and Sikoa, or what's going to happen?
I'm totally departing from reality in terms of what I want to see with this. I want a Survivor Series main event where you've got the Usos and Solo Sikoa, and bring in Lance Anoa'i, bring in I forget the dude's name, Samoan Werewolf.
Oh, the ones that are in MLW?
Yeah, but
there's some more family members right there.
Get them too. And Roman replaces the rest of his family with Haku's kids. So Tama Tonga, Tangaloa.
And then the big tall one.
Yeah, Hikuleo.
Yeah, Hikuleo.
And basically run a full-on Pacific Islander feud.
Yeah.
I would love to see that.
Wait, what happened to Barbarian's daughter? She was in Impact, first TNA. She came back. She was Gail Kim's bodyguard, and she just didn't make it. I was kind of disappointed. I thought that was neat because then you would have some great history. Nia Jax and her, for example. I don't know why, when they, I don't know why Nia Jax is not in the bloodline, but I don't think they're bringing back, they're bringing her back. It was just a one-off for Royal Rumble, and then the TV the next night where I think she got booed out of the building.
I always thought they should have run with Nia Jackson and Tamina as a team.
Right. Well, they did it very briefly.
Yeah, but they should have laid waste to the division.
And what is Tamina doing now? That's how you know Vince is back more than, say, Triple H. And, everything probably still has to go through Vince. But waste of Karrion Kross, even though he had a terrific match with AJ Styles. And Tamina, not on TV. They completely jobbed out, the gal that had the 24/7 title. I can't think of her name now.
Dana Brooke?
Yeah, Dana Brooke. She just was laid out by Rhea Ripley. What was it, last Monday or the Monday prior?
Well, you're seeing a lot of the favorites from Triple H, the ones that he was trying to push are now,
but they're all getting squashed now. Karrion Kross,
they're all getting beaten up. I was going to say, it's sort of like Vince McMahon saying, you're not my favorite anymore. You might have been a Triple H's favorite.
Well, from NXT, but I keep saying this. So what is going on with, see, I'm not thinking, not Wade Barrett. See, this is what happens when you're approaching 70. Drew McIntyre. Has there been any explanation? Is he just injured? Why has he been off TV for?
Injured, and his contract is coming up. And apparently it's a real question as to whether he's going to resign or not. So
where would he go?
AEW would be the obvious choice.
Well, I'm sure, but I mean, no. I mean, he's really been on a nice push since he returned. But Bray Wyatt, no explanation. I bet he's out the door again. So I don't know, unless they can come up with something.
So he was supposed to be a combination, and again, this is dirt sheet stuff, so who knows? But he was a combination of legitimately being injured, and he also
allegedly reset.
Well, no, they wanted a reset. They wanted to bring back the Fiend for WrestleMania for his match against Bobby Lashley, and he balked at that. He thinks that character's dead.
It is dead,
and wanted to keep rolling forward with this Uncle Howdy stuff, which I was really excited for at the outset. But I've got to tell you, I thought it was starting to drag, and I've got a ton of patience for long-term storytelling. So hopefully they can figure out something to do with him, because I personally think the guy's awesome and incredibly.
Yeah, he's an amazing guy, but he's squandered.
But he needs.
Well, they should have revealed it was Bo Dallas. That could have been done in lengthy storytelling, and it would have been fun with the reveal finally pulling off the prosthetic makeup. I don't know. They never acknowledged that they were brothers ever, not even in NXT.
I know the WWE is weird like that. My brother and I always thought that was kind of funny how they would never acknowledge that Randy Savage and Lanny Poffo were brothers until very late.
Well, they did in their family promotion. They eventually did after the first year in ICW. I don't think I've told Jonathan or you this, Russ, how interesting ICW was, because they weren't just in Kentucky and Tennessee. They sent out, for whatever reason, they had no intention of ever coming out to LA, San Francisco, and Chicago, for example. And I taped right off television. I had my mom taping in LA, the ICW, and myself in San Francisco. This was 79 to 80, 81, 82, early 82. But they would insert local vignettes. And I told the historian guy at WWE about this. So he thought he had all the ICW. No, I have this stuff where they would insert either, typically Randy, trashing the locals. So if it was in Los Angeles, Randy would say, "Oh, your promoter Mike LaBelle and John Tolis, Neil Moskowitz, Freddie Blassie, they're all nothings." And for the San Francisco ICW TV, they would insert in, and he would trash Roy Shire, Ray Stevens, Pat Patterson, even though Pat and Ray were long gone. So they're trashing the local promotions. Maybe they were thinking if they got really picked up and it started going, it'd be like the IWA, and they might tour there and run a Outlaw to LA, San Francisco. And they did the same in Chicago, trashing Dick the Bruiser, the Crusher, etc., localized, because that was a combination AWA, WWA, Gagne Bruiser in Chicago. So that was, so anyway, but in the ICW, that was the only promotion. Well, no. I think Memphis, they acknowledged they were brothers, Randy and Lanny, when they were, teaming against Rock and Rolls and had all those extending 4- and 5-star matches with some other teams there too.
Well, I just thought it was always funny that at least in the WWE, they never acknowledge them, but they have so many other guys who aren't actually brothers pretend like they're brothers. Like the Andersons and Valiants and so forth. You have a lot of guys.
The guys who aren't brothers, they'll claim they're brothers, and the guys that are legit brothers, they won't. Have you guys watched though? Have you done deep dives on ICW? The Poffo family promotion, because a lot of names came out of there, and they already had established names. Bob Orton Jr., Ronnie Garvin were there as lead faces against Savage. That's where he was first Macho Man. But Crusher Broomfield became one-man gang and Akeem. He was Crusher Broomfield there, and he helped turn Randy face before the promotion went under, and was heel against the babyface Randy Savage well before. That was really the only time I can recall before he turned face in WWF, the Randy was, and this was before WWF, and quite a few guys came out of there. But they also had one of the more unique. They had the Devil's Duo managed by Izzy Slapowitz, and they were all three claiming to be Jewish, and Izzy Slapowitz did. I can't really recall in any other promotion a so-called Jewish character was stereotypical, and then cursing out the faces in Yiddish.
Eddie Creechman.
Oh, Eddie Creechman, you're right.
Sorry.
The wonderful Eddie Creechman was far bigger than Izzy Slapowitz. Everybody remembers. And then his son was son Floyd, right?
Yeah.
Floyd Creechman. Eddie Creechman, though, not an Ernie Roth, not an Abdullah Farouk Grand Wizard in terms of speaking. A lot of the time it was, but he was.
Hang on. Let me cover Eddie Creechman for a second, because Eddie Creechman is one of the few characters who my dad, who's a wrestling fan going way back, legitimately hated. And to this day, when we talk about Heyman or MJF or any Jewish character who kind of plays into the stereotypical part of things, that's the frame of reference. Eddie Creechman came out of Montreal and the Quebec circuit. And at very late in the Montreal territory, he actually wound up buying it out in its dying days. But before that, you have to understand that...
Is that Grand Prix or Rougeau?
Grand Prix.
Okay.
So, but you kind of have to understand that there was, in Quebec, historically, in some parts of the province, with a certain degree of enmity between the local French-Canadian population, which was in the process of kind of redefining itself, and the minority populations, including the Jewish community. So if you were a Jewish kid growing up in my grandfather's time, it was not uncommon to be literally chased to and from school and had the stuffings knocked out of you. Eddie Creechman played to the most vile, stereotypical hatred that was already existent within that part of the community. And he reveled in it. And he would come out to the ring chomping a cigar and talking about how much money he had and wearing a big Star of David or a high on his chest. And he would be paired with whatever the foreign menace of the day was. So, I mean, if you think...
But how bizarre is it? Jewish, and he's paired with the Sheik.
That's where I was going. That if you think geopolitically, the fact that the two managers and the Sheik had plenty of managers, but the two with whom he's most closely associated with are Eddie Creechman, who basically played this awful stereotypical character, but did it brilliantly well, and Ernie Roth as Abdullah Farouk or the Grand Wizard. And he and Roth never kind of put his actual ethnicity at front and center. The funny part about Roth is when he went with the Grand Wizard name when he was managing in the WWF, was that he actually chose it as a direct slap in the face of the head of the Ku Klux Klan. Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely, yes, because
they would have to.
But the KKK were anti-Jewish besides being anti-black.
Oh, they hate everybody.
Oh yeah,
yeah, they just hate everybody.
and to kind of tie things back to the beginning of the show, if you think about Ernie Roth's place in wrestling history, here you've got a guy who's Jewish and gay, and openly gay at a time when not many were. Similar to Pat Patterson, where it was an open secret that he was. But he certainly wasn't going to play that up for the crowds. I think the first really openly gay wrestler that I can think of was Chris Colt.
Yep.
And he was incredibly innovative, but also kind of a sad story on a personal level.
Yeah, no, I'm glad.
I've had a chance to see Chris Colt's matches, and my God, the guy was ahead of his time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to see us get around that, as I said, come full circle to totally queer wrestling, and for totally queer wrestling to be a success as it is without having to be over the top in everything that it does. That they are able to incorporate good wrestling instead of trying to sensationalize the queer aspect of it and make the wrestling secondary. I think they.
Are there any other promotions like that though? Because I know GCW has
so.
Epic, but I don't know if there's unless they're just really small and haven't gotten the PR yet.
Totally Queer is very small, so
Right, but are there any other promotions in the U.S. or Canada that are calling themselves that and having
not that I know of
predominance of the workers being?
Yeah, no, these guys are just getting started again. It's for the last 2 years, nobody really could introduce anything like that because things were so dead for all indie crowds. And this is really, as I said, it's the first time I've come back to a wrestling match. I mean, people there weren't, other than the wrestlers, nobody else was wearing masks, and people are starting to mellow out about the idea that crowds, you can be in a big crowd and you don't need to, wear a hazmat suit anymore, and as the weather gets better and we're done with all the gallons and gallons.
Well, you said they had an outdoor, it was outdoors too.
So yeah. So I think that it's lending to more, people being able to gather more. And as they gather more, they're clamoring now for live performances because they haven't seen one in 2 or 3 years. So it's sort of, it's kind of going back the other way now, and indie wrestling, I think, is becoming stronger. We're seeing crowds now for indie shows that we didn't see.
Oh, indies are on fire.
Yeah, we haven't seen.
Jonathan, when you agree, indies have been on fire for quite a long time.
Yeah, we haven't seen these kind of crowds since the early 2000s.
APW is finally starting to put on shows, but they've already been kind of surpassed by the South San Francisco group, bringing in New Japan and AEW stars.
Yeah, and we're seeing, but also just people are also feeling like they want to be there for the indie talent. They're enjoying the indie talent more than they are going out to go see the bigger WWE shows, because the WWE shows are leaving them flat. They're just, people are not getting the excitement.
Well, they are selling out. You can't say whatever you feel about WWE. They are the Saudi Arabia trip.
They are. The ratings overall are down.
Packed.
When you talk across the board for the WWE.
Well, they're not what they were in the Attitude Era, when
right.
the ratings were much higher.
But
the ratings are up. Everything is up for WWE. I would hope AEW gets them back to where they should be. But those aren't always indicators of everything. And the deal they get, they might be more lucrative if they get, I've heard a figure as much as $400 million per year from total programming.
Wow.
From the TNT TBS. So that might even be bigger than what WWE is getting, either from Fox individually or USA Network. And when is, Jonathan, do you know when WWE's USA, that's really part of NBC Universal? It's weird that they're on NBC Universal and it's sort of the diametric opposite in Fox in terms of...
I believe early 2024. So when Vince McMahon came back from his exile, the whole purpose behind it was to engineer the sale and to be involved in the next round of negotiations with networks as to where the content's going to land.
Wow. Well, when that lands, that'll make a big.
Because I think Vince is like Charlton Heston. They won't be able to take the pencil out of his cold, dead hands or pry it out the way Charlton Heston was referring to a gun. Yet another problem with America. We don't see that in Canada. We don't see mass killings every week, every other week in Mexico or Europe, anywhere else. Just in this, at times, idiotic country, my United States. Gun violence that's out of control, besides all the other problems going on here. No wonder people say they want to, and I'm sure, Jonathan, aren't people rebelling depending on the province and the city when Americans say, oh, if Trump gets elected, I'm moving up to Canada. I don't know.
It never actually happens.
Yeah, a lot of people just don't do it. They say, all these celebrities, oh, I'm going to move to Canada. And I can't really think of.
It's not so easy to just up and move to Canada. You have to have a sponsor.
No, we have standards.
Yeah, you guys, it's not, can't just.
No offense to any American viewers, please.
What would you have to do? I know we're running to the end of the show, but it's probably not that easy for a U.S. citizen to move and want to live permanently in Canada. I'm sure there's a lot of paperwork and things one would have to do. It's not a simple process, or is it?
Well, I'm not an immigration lawyer. I think that the other challenge is that there are still ties to the United States. So, for example, taxes in the U.S. follow citizenship. So you can move to Canada and be resident here, but you're still on the hook for American taxes as well as Canadian. And there's a way
be doing double duty then.
Yeah, and there's a formula that you can kind of mitigate that, but you're still kind of on the hook for both, which is disincentive.
Because I know, for example, people in California infiltrating Seattle and like Portland, so those two states, Washington State and Oregon, the people get fed up and say, no, we don't want any more Californians, any spoiled Californians coming up here. We barely can handle all of our own folks.
Well, so the one that I'd heard, and this is, up here, so obviously we don't necessarily get the same news as you guys do, but that there was an outflow of Californians to Texas and to Florida particularly, which strikes me as...
And Iowa and Idaho, where there's Republican bastions, a lot of those folks are moving. Companies as well.
Yeah, companies are moving there, and property is so cheap.
And Elon Musk was threatening to move his whole Northern California facility for Teslas to, I forget if it was going to be San Antonio or Houston, and he's big-time Republican now. That's a scary thing, too. CNN, they took all that S for having Trump on for a forum, and now they don't follow that up with a Democrat, to be fair. If you're going to do one, we'll have the other to at least be fair. No, the next spotlight was tonight with Nikki Haley, another person, Republican, running for office. I don't know what's happening with CNN. Well, it's the new guy in charge is being branded a Republican, but CNN was always like sort of a liberal.
Yeah,
or fair.
When Vince gets a talk show.
Truly fair and balanced, but it's not. It's not like CNBC or MSNBC
when Vince
anymore.
McMahon gets a talk show on CNN, we'll know he's gone too far. We'll know that CNN has gone too far when they give Vince McMahon his own talk show. Vince and Linda McMahon get their own talk show. Anyway, guys,
I don't think that they're doing a double act anymore.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. Although,
it's going to be no. As we close here, it's going to be Vince and his mustache, the talk show.
Yes. Vince's mustache.
I saw that TV show. It was the Addams Family.
Yeah, that's perfect to end on. Anyway, guys, it's great to have you again this week, Jonathan. It was great to have your input, and we'll have you
always great having Jonathan
so often for special events and stuff like that. Somebody big dies. We'll get you back.
We'll just tape a little bit earlier. Russ and Evan and I will join Jonathan. There'll be the four of us.
Well,
we had a great show. We had Evan back 2 weeks ago.
We'll
I want to say this: R.I.P. to Tina Turner. We lost superstar Graham, Tina Turner, and female great wrestler Peggy Lee Leather, who was very, very young. She was under 60. Lost Peggy Lee Leather recently.
And what happened with her? Because I'd actually followed her on Facebook, and she was active until fairly recently.
Yeah, that was a
sad one.
Yeah.
This came in under the news while we were online that Giants manager Roger Craig died. The one that took the Giants to the World Series. Died. He just died. So
sorry to hear that.
Yeah, along with Vita Blue, we've lost some classic San Francisco Giants this year, but the beat moves on, and we still are alive, so we'll be around.
Oh, Roger Craig was the Hum Baby guy, right?
Yeah,
that was his
slogan,
he was, Hum Baby.
Yes.
The SF Giants.
Part of the Earthquake series. He was in the Earthquake World Series that happened in '89. So a lot of memories there. Anyway, guys, we're still around. Hopefully, we'll all make it to next week's show. I'll see you guys again real soon, and thanks for being on the show this week.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.
Hey, Jonathan.